Welcome to the second session of the General Operational Management Module, Controlling Physical Resources. In this session, we'll be looking at the various physical resources we have in our businesses as SMEs and why it is important to manage them for better productivity. We'll also be taking you through the 5 steps to managing the 4 types of resources in your businesses. As earlier said in the objectives, there are 4 types of resources. The first being the human resources, which is also called the manpower. In most businesses, even as SMEs, we have workers or staffs working for us. These resources are known as the human resources in our businesses, and they're very important for achieving our objectives as SMEs. What is the second resources? It's called the finance. This is also called money. Most businesses need capital to start up. Finance is a resource which every SME seeks for to secure, enable to buy or provide other resources needed in the businesses. The third, which is the equipment. If we're able to achieve the finance, the capital for our businesses, we'll be able to procure equipment or machines we need for production, for other services that we might need in the business. And finally, the material resources. This can be said as the materials we need in production to achieve our product or a service. It can come in terms of, in agriculture, feeds; in construction, the cement and the sand used in building; in fashion, the fabric used; and in education, the books and the pens used are all the material resources. So let's take a look at the 5 steps process to managing these resources we have identified. The first step, deciding what you want to achieve. For example, an SME deciding to venture into catfish farming or poultry farming. The second step, making plans to achieve it. This basically means the SME having the required skill and knowledge to set up the business or create the product. The third step, specifying the necessary resources. Having acquired the knowledge and skill to set up the business, the SME can now identify the specific resources needed to create the product. For example, in the catfish farming, the resources needed will be the fish pond, the feeds, the figurines, the labor, and the required capital. The fourth, locating, acquiring, and preparing those resources. This could be where the SME can find, acquire, and turn these resources to finished products. And finally, controlling and organizing these resources to best effects. Let's take a look at the difference between equipment and technology. This is because managers seem to be confused about which is technology and which is equipment. Actually, equipment is part of technology, and equipment is actually tangible. It can also be controlled, while technology includes factors that may be beyond our own control as SMEs. So the machines and the tools we have in our businesses are our equipment, and also any other visible means used to change our resources to products or our services would also be part of our equipment. Whereas technology, the people in our businesses, the methods of our organization, and the information will all fall under technology. Let's take a look at planning for this equipment. How do we make plans for equipment? We look at the process plan. Why is a process plan important? Let's define what a process plan is. A process plan is a key document in our production. It allows us to know the exact operations and the inputs and the outputs for each operation in the business. In this way, we are able to know the material usage that will be needed to produce a unit of any of our products in our businesses. So it's advisable that SMEs in production do have a process plan to enable them achieve effective productivity. Another way of making plans for equipment would be SMEs making a capacity requirement plans. This is an important part of ensuring that a company can meet production expectation. If a firm fails to take steps before production, it may find itself unexpectedly unable to produce the amount of goods that it has agreed to make with its current facility. SMEs need to be aware of this plan because it actually improves their production processes. What are the common mistakes SMEs make in acquiring equipment? Let's take a look at some of them. 1. No real need. Most times, as SMEs, we find ourselves purchasing equipment that we really do not need in our production processes. Secondly, equipment not suited to our own infrastructure and environment. We might purchase equipment that we might not be able to use in the facility we've already built, or the environment might not be favorable to the equipment or machine that was purchased. Number 3, why purchase an equipment which might have the technical documents missing? Some of us as SMEs are guilty of this. Number 4, spare parts difficult to source. As SMEs, we might be guilty of buying a machine where you need to order the spare parts outside the country of production. And lastly, lack of capable technicians within the enterprise. As SMEs, it's advisable we have workers or technicians within our businesses who can maintain or manage this equipment we've purchased. So what are some of these concerns we might have in selecting the equipment we want to purchase? Number 1, suitability. With the current capacity, technology, and development strategy of our business, is the equipment suitable? The cost. We need to pay attention to the costs of setting up, training our staffs, and also testing the machine. Number 3, energy consumption. What is the energy consumption for the equipment we want to purchase? We should be looking at equipment which consumes the least amount of energy. Number 4, the labor required. What is the amount of labor required for the quantity and quality of the local labor market in which our businesses are set up? Number 5, the input material requirements. What is the availability of the materials for the equipment in our own local market? Number 6, adaptability. Can the machine operate well in the local environment where we do our production? Would it adapt well to the temperature or to the humidity as well? Number 7, environment influences. What is the equipment's impact on our own environment? And lastly, other factors like, is the equipment user-friendly? Where's the availability of the spare parts? And do we have technical support for the equipment? Let's take a look at arranging the equipment. What are the factors we need to consider when arranging our equipment in our production facilities? First of all, accessibility. Is it easily accessed? Secondly, maximum safety. The equipment should be set up in a way that it offers no danger to any of the employees or staff. Thirdly, best use of space. How well do we use the space allocated for the equipment? We need to be conscious not to put the equipment in a place where it affects movement of workers or employees in the production facility. Number 4, minimum distance. The equipment should be within reach of the workers in the factory. Number 5, one-way flow. There should be a one-way flow for the production equipment. And lastly, minimum discomfort. The equipment should not be of any inconvenience to any of the workers or staff in the factory. Now let's take a look at the day-to-day difficulties we might have as SMEs in using our equipment in our businesses. Some of the challenges might actually be people not properly trained. For the equipment that we have purchased, we might need to train personnel to be able to handle the equipment. So that might be a challenge if we don't have the staff that are not trained properly. Secondly, machinery breakdown. This happens a lot in our businesses. Thirdly, insufficient equipment. That can affect our production capacity. Number 4, inappropriate use of equipment, using our machines for other things. And number 5, abuse of equipment. This is mishandling of the equipment by our workers or employees. And lastly, incorrect use of equipment. So how then do we determine equipment efficiency or realize the optimum value of the equipment? The criteria we'll be using to evaluate equipment operations would be: 1, downtime, the time during which a machine is out of action or unavailable for use. Secondly will be the operating speed. The actual operational speed is lower than the design speed or minor stoppages. The third one, defect rate. And lastly, the SMED. What does SMED mean? Single minute exchange of die. This is a practice Toyota uses to reduce its time of changing broken parts on the assembly line to 1 minute so as to maximize use of equipment and increase speed of production. Now let's take a look at what stock and inventory means in our businesses. What is a stock? The stock consists of all goods and materials that are stored by an organization. It is a store of items that is kept for future use. This is a finished product that is sold by the business. In some cases, the stock is also the raw material if the business also sells those products to its customers. An example would be in a car dealership where the stock includes cars but can also include tires, engine parts, or other car accessories. Inventory. Inventory is a list of the items held in stock. It includes, in a small business, finished products as well as the raw materials used to make the product, the machinery used to produce its products, and the building in which the products are made. In other words, anything which goes into producing the item sold by the business is part of its inventory. Let's now take a look at managing our inventory. There are 2 methods in which we can manage inventory. The first being dependent demand method. What does this mean? It's an assumption that the demand for an item is directly related to the demand for other items, with this relation used to control our stock. The second method is called the independent demand method, an assumption that the demand for an item is independent of the demand of any other item. Let's take the example of a car. The car, as finished good, is produced and held in inventory as independent demand item, while the raw materials and components used in the manufacture of the finished good, which is the car, derives its demand from the demand for the car and is hence categorized as what? Dependent demand inventory. Let's take a look at the basic principles of stock control as SMEs. What are the problems of holding stock? High stock equals high expense, and low stock equals high risk. As SMEs, we need to note that stock is an expense and not a source of profit. Also, stock value usually makes up 50 to 60% of an enterprise's capital. Goods in a warehouse do not have any profit until they are bought. Before that, they are only an expense. If there are insufficient materials, the production of the enterprise may be risked. This will also lead to greater expenses. So, what are the costs associated with keeping our stocks? The fundamental principle of stock control simply says, keep the minimum stock in the minimum amount space for the minimum period of time. Now, let's take a deeper look into the inventory strategy under the dependent demand method. We have 3 different strategies which can be employed by SMEs. The just-in-time, they call the JIT. Secondly, the materials requirement planning, MRP. And lastly, manufacturing resource planning, MRP. So what is the just-in-time? JIT is an inventory strategy companies employ to increase efficiency and decrease waste by receiving goods only as they are needed in production process, thereby reducing their inventory costs. This method requires producers to forecast demand accurately. Materials requirement planning, MRP. A MRP information system is a sales forecast based system used to schedule raw materials, deliveries, and quantities, Given assumptions of machine and labor units required to fulfill a sale forecast. And finally, MRP2, which is manufacturing resource planning. This involved from early material requirement planning system by including the integration of additional data such as what? Employee and financial need. This system is designed to centralize, integrate, and process information for effective decision making in scheduling, design engineering, inventory management, and cost control in manufacturing. So now let's take a look at the independent demand method. There are two typical systems of stock control: the perpetual inventory and the periodic inventory. What is the perpetual inventory? In this inventory system, the stock is checked regularly, and when the stock reaches a certain level, a new order is placed. That certain level is called the reorder level. For every other product, the ordered quantity would be fixed. Whereas in periodic inventory, the stock is checked periodically, which can be every week, month, or quarter, and orders are placed accordingly. Ordered quantities would vary for each order. Note, in order to manage stock well, managers must know the answers to the two questions: when to order and how much should be ordered. There are some factors which we need to consider when determining the quantity of the order. Number one, the quantity of the stock on hand. Number two, average usage level. Number three, cost of placing an order. And finally, stock cost. How much to order depends on the inventory system which is used by the enterprise or the business. For the periodic inventory system, open to buy method, and for the perpetual system inventory, it's called the economic order quantity method. So what is an open to buy method? An open to buy method is an inventory management tool that helps you as SME figure out how much inventory you need to buy on a monthly basis to make your sales projections. The goal of the open to buy method is not to keep you from buying. Rather, the goal is to ensure the correct inventory level so you do not have much or too little inventory. The second inventory management system we mentioned earlier, called the economic order quantity. This is the lot size that minimizes total annual inventory holding and ordering costs. This can also be said as the order quantity of inventory that minimizes the total cost of inventory management. Two most important categories of inventory costs are ordering costs and carrying costs. Ordering costs are the costs that are incurred on obtaining additional inventories. They include the cost incurred on communicating the order, transportation costs, whereas carrying cost represents the cost incurred on holding inventory in hand. They include the opportunity cost of money held up in inventories, storage costs, and spoilage costs. Ordering costs and carrying costs are quite opposite to each other. If we need to minimize carrying costs, we have to place small order, which increases the ordering cost. If we want to minimize our ordering costs, we have to place few orders in a year, and this requires placing large orders, which in turn increases the total carrying costs for the period. We need to minimize the total inventory cost, and the economic order quantity model helps us to do that. Total inventory cost equals ordering costs plus holding costs. Now let's take a look at the factors we consider when we're managing our stock. We have the lead time. The lead time is the time from the order to the delivery of material. We also have the safety stock. This is the amount of stock you should carry to protect yourself against unforeseen delivery delays and to allow for potential increase in use. And lastly, we have the average use. Average use is just the rate at which the stock is used. So the enterprise should determine the amount of stock by guarding against a shortage of materials. So as SMEs, when do we reorder? The reorder point is the level at which the enterprise should place a new order to ensure that the stock issued during the lead time does not eat into the safety stock. We have come to the end of the session. In this session, we discussed the various types of resources we can have in our businesses and the various steps to managing these resources. It's now time for you to take your end of session activity.